Hello everyone, and welcome to the next video in our guide series for Temtem. In this video, we'll be going over battle basics and everything you'll need to know before you try your hand at the battlegrounds. The first thing we're going to look over today is status conditions. Status conditions play a huge role in Temtem and are at the cornerstone of a lot of different teams. Status conditions each have their own unique effect that affect the Temtem they're attached to in some way. There are three types of status conditions that can be applied, being positive, negative, and neutral. These all have then different branches of status conditions that can be applied that we'll get into in a little bit. First, though, I want to explain how status conditions work in Temtem. So, any Temtem can have a max of two status conditions on it at any given time. In something like Pokemon, for example, what would happen is you just wouldn't be able to put a status condition on a Pokemon anymore. If you're burned, you can't be put to sleep. You're just burned. You can't have a new status applied until the burn status is no longer there. In Temtem, it works a little differently. Since you can have two status conditions on you at any given time, you are actually able to push off old status conditions. So it works in a first in, first out situation. If you are, let's say, rejuvenating and burned, and again, we'll get into what these do a little later, and someone puts you to sleep, your rejuvenating is going to fall off. This provides a big strategic advantage whether you want to remove negative status conditions from yourself or positive conditions from an enemy. It makes the status condition system very deep, and it's integral to learn how this works for success in Temtem. Now that we've defined what status conditions are and how they work in Temtem, let's go over the different ones you may come across. The first one we're going to go across is sleep. So an asleep Temtem cannot attack, cannot take an action. It basically sits on the board asleep until the sleep timer runs out or it takes damage. And it's good to note this is damage from any source, trait, item, status condition, or of course an attack. Any attack will wake you up. You can attack from a teammate. There's lots of different ways to play around sleep. But any damage will wake you up. When you wake up, you get the alerted status condition. So what the alerted condition does, it basically means that you cannot fall asleep anymore until the alerted status condition is no longer there. It's basically a way of removing sleep lock from the game. Now, you can still have sleep lock by pushing off statuses, but it's a pretty niche and very specific situations, but that's what the alerted status does. Finally, you cannot put a mental type Temtem to sleep. You will see that type immunities to different statuses will be a running theme in Temtem as we go down. Next up, we have the burned status condition. A burned Temtem will lose 1/16 of his HP at the end of each round and will also deal 30% less damage with any attack, being physical or special. A couple things to note, the burned status condition erases the cold or frozen status condition if it is applied to a Temtem with those statuses. It actually overwrites them. There are a few statuses that work that way. And of course, fire type Temtem are immune to being burned. Next up, we have the cold status condition. It doesn't really do much other than if you have two applications of cold on you. So if someone uses cold breeze, applies 3 stacks of cold. If they use it again without their status being cleared, you will become frozen. So what frozen does is basically stuns the Temtem. It works similar to sleep, but it cannot be removed unless you push it off or inflict them with the burn status condition. That's the only ways to get rid of freezing on Temtem, except for a few cases of like items being able to do it. Also to note, as we mentioned with the burn status condition removing cold and frozen will also overwrite any burn. So these overwriting effects do not go with pushing off a status. If something is rejuvenating and burned and they become cold, they will be cold and rejuvenating. It does not push off any previous ones, it actually overwrites it. So, just for a note on how the pushing system works. Next up, we have exhausted. The exhausted condition basically makes you use 1.5 times any stamina you need to use for a move. If you're using a move that uses 22 stamina while you're exhausted, you'll actually be using 33 stamina. So that's the basic. I mean, there's nothing really more to that than exhausted. It's basically a control mechanic to try and keep people's stamina bar down, noting that the Vigorize status, which goes hand in hand with Exhausted, will actually remove Exhausted from it. They will cancel each other out. And that works, of course, if something is Vigorized and they become Exhausted. These two statuses cancel each other out. Next up, we have Isolated. Pretty simple. Any Temtem that is isolated does not benefit from synergies. So that also includes synergies of your partner. So if your partner is not isolated, but is trying to use a move that is supposed to synergize with you, it will not work. So basically, no matter which Temtem is isolated on your side of the field, synergies will not work because you only ever have two on the field. So synergies won't work either way. Next up, we have the Poison status condition. Poison Temtem will lose 1/8 of their HP at the end of each round. There's no other interactions other than toxic type Temtem are immune to being poisoned. Next up is Seized. Seized Temtem does not benefit from their gear. This does include if a Temtem is seized and they have a one-time use gear, it is disabled until the seized is gone, and then it will be able to proc. So basically, it just treats the Temtem as it doesn't have a gear until the seized condition runs out. And finally, on the list of negative status conditions, we have Trapped. A Trapped Temtem cannot swap out. Pretty self-explanatory, no other interactions there. The main way you see Trapped used is there are a couple moves that will go before you're able to swap, and you can trap things in. If they try to swap while trapped, it'll just fail and they won't get a turn. Next up are the positive status conditions. So we'll go over them there now. Alerted we already went through, so we're going to go to Regenerated. A regenerated Temtem will heal 1/10 of their HP at the end of each round. Pretty self-explanatory, nothing extra there. A Temtem with the evading status will not be affected by the next offensive move used against it until evading runs out. One thing to note is you can still buff a Temtem that is being evaded, as that is not considered an offensive technique, seeming that it's not meant to damage or disable the opponent in any way. But if you try to use something like Hypnosis, that would block it, as that is considered an offensive technique. Also good to note that it doesn't matter if the offensive technique is from your side or your opponent's side, it will still block it. Next up, we have the immune status. Very straightforward. If something is immune, they cannot have any other statuses applied to it, positive, negative, or neutral. And finally, for the positive status conditions, we have the invigorated condition. This is a mirror of the exhausted condition. So a Temtem who is invigorated will take 50% less stamina to use a move. So in the example we used before, if something is using a move that has 22 stamina, it would only use 11 stamina to use the move instead of 22. And as we said before, applying the exhausted condition will negate the invigorated condition, so they do work hand in hand that way. Next up, we have the neutral status conditions, which is only one being nullified. This is basically makes the Temtem have no type. Nullified Temtem are not affected by any type charts. So a fire Temtem that is nullified will not take double damage from water. We'll note that they are still considered a fire type when it comes to synergies as well as status conditions. So a fire type that is nullified will still not be able to be burned and will still activate fire synergies. And finally, the only other condition that wasn't listed before is Doomed. The reason for this is Doomed is its own category, as it doesn't get affected by any kind of outside factors that normally would apply. So basically, it's not coded as any neutral, positive, or negative, because that would mess with how it would be perceived in other situations. They are affected by neutrality. A neutrality boundary cannot be doomed. In that way, they are negative. However, they are not affected by resistant, which is the main reason I think that they wouldn't be classified as a negative. They are not reduced due to resistant, as that would actually make doomed more effective on resistant, which is not really the point. In this section of the video, we're going to briefly go over techniques in Temtem. So techniques in Temtem work similarly to most monster tamers, but there are a couple differences. So first I'm going to go over the basics of what's similar to other monster tamer games, and then I'll go a bit more in depth to anything that's different. So first off, you have your type. Each move has a type, which is pretty standard. So of course, a fire type technique will be dealing fire type damage, and will get a stab bonus if you being used by a fire type Temtem. The next is the class of technique. There are 3 classes: your physical, which will be using your attack stat against the opponent's defense stat; special, which will use your special attack versus the opponent's special defense stat; and finally a status move that is non-damaging techniques but have some other effects that go along with them. Next up here we have the damage formula that's right here. I'm not going to get too far into it because normally I just use the Temtem calculator. You don't really need to understand the formula just to get into it, but just in case anyone is curious, here it is. And of course, finally, you have the stamina cost of each move. The next thing we're going to go over in Temtem is the priority system. So the priority system is something that all moves have. Each move will have a different priority associated with it, and that will include this Temtem speed stat when determining the turn order. We'll go over all of the different priorities here, but that's a basic rundown. So different moves, if they have a higher priority, even if you have a lower speed stat, you may end up going first in the turn order. First up, we have the very low priority. Basically, this means that it will always go last unless another Temtem that is slower has used a very low priority move, but it's very rare. Not very many moves have a very low priority, so they will generally go last. Next up, we have the low priority. This means that the technique will go at half of the speed of the Temtem. So if your Temtem has a 100 speed stat, your effective speed will be 50 speed. Next up, we have normal priority. So this just makes it so that your speed stat is your speed stat. If you have 219 speed, you're going to go at effective 219. There's no added bonus. High priority means the technique will be 1.5 times faster. So for example, if you're using a high priority move with a Temtem with 200 speed, you will be moving at 300 effective speed. Next up, we have the very high priority. This works at a 1.75 times speed. So for example, if you were working with a 100 speed Temtem, a very high priority move would move at 175 speed. And finally, we have the ultra priority moves. These go before swaps happen. So normally swaps will happen at the very beginning of a turn. The only exception is when someone is using an ultra priority move. And yeah, guys, that's a basic rundown of the priority system. The priority system is really important for high level gameplay and is always good to note. Even if you have a Temtem that you know is faster than the opponent, if they have access to a priority move, they can really catch you off guard. So it's always something you have to keep in mind. The next thing that's a bit different in Temtem is the hold system. The hold system works similarly to a cooldown, but you actually need to charge up the move first before you can use it. So think of holds as something that you need to wait to be able to use. For example, a hold 1 technique, you'll have to be on the field with the Temtem for 1 turn before your hold comes up. So I believe you can get up to like hold 4 moves. Generally, with most Temtem, you'll see moves between hold 0, which you can use turn 1, versus hold 2 moves, which you can use on turn 3, or 3 turns of being on the battlefield. Good to note that a Temtem must remain on the battlefield for the turn to get a hold up. So if you swap out a Temtem, it does not gain its hold, but whatever Temtem comes in will gain its hold up. And there are some niche situations like cheer up, which you can actually affect the hold of different Temtem. The last main difference in Temtem when it comes to techniques is the synergy system. So for synergies, depending on if you have a certain type that goes along with the move, it will deal either more damage or have some kind of additional effect. For example, Stone Ball is a technique that on its own is just 120 base power and 34 stamina. However, if you have a Fire Temtem next to the Earth Temtem using Stone Ball, it actually gains the synergy of dealing 2 or inflicting burn for 2 turns. Of course, to activate a synergy, normally how it works is you have an ally of the type that your synergy is asking for. So, like I said in that example, a Stone Ball user would have to have a fire type as their other slot to use synergies. The only exception to this is Volgon, which has a trait that allows it to act as all synergies. Synergies is probably one of the more interesting things that makes Temtem different. It allows you to have a lot of cool ideas with team building. For example, electric Temtem generally like to be paired with neutrals as they cover off the mentals as well as get sparkling bullet synergy, which makes it a very powerful turn 1 move. Alright, next up in this video we have the draft phase. So this is one of the big things that sets Temtem apart from other games in the same genre, you actually bring 8 Temtem to a battle and are left with 5 when you go in to actually play the game. The reason for this is the draft phase. You and your opponent take turns banning and picking your Temtem in a specific order to try and decide what you're going to want to bring to each matchup. As you can see here, I have a screenshot of a draft phase I had during a match versus Scooteasy, and I'll basically go over the rundown here. So as you can see, there is a blue side and an orange side. This is determined at random for in-game battles, ladder, stuff like that. If you're playing in community tournaments and you actually challenge someone to a battle, whoever invites will be on the blue side. So if you're ever playing a community tournament, you'll do a coin toss to see who gets to pick their side, basically. The main differences between the side selection would be that blue side gets to counter pick in the first round, which is really important, counter picking on the lead, while orange side gets to counter ban the lead. So what this means is when you open up into a battle, blue side will ban an orange Tem first, then the orange side can decide which ban to use or which thing to ban based on what blue side banned on their side. And then blue side picks their Tem, orange picks twice, and then blue side picks again. So basically, blue side gets to see both of orange side's picks before they pick their second Temtem for their opener. This leads to really powerful opportunities for blue side to take over the game. It is not like a guaranteed win by any means. I think it's slightly favored blue side, but it is matchup dependent. There are actually matchups where I will prefer to be on orange side because I know what I need to pick round one anyways, and the counter ban is much more valuable in some matchups. But I would say that blue side probably wins about 55% of the time. We don't have any numbers to back that up. I just think that's about how favored the matchup is. But this is something, it's definitely something to get used to in Temtem. Most Monster Tamer games don't have this. I find it's very interesting. It's actually one of the reasons I was drawn to Temtem. I think it's very well done, but it definitely is something to get used to. So I will be doing in one of the videos, I will probably go over the pick and ban phase a bit more, but that is the basic rundown of what you can expect. The next thing we'll go over in this video is the battle log. So this is something that can be picked up while you're in the battle to basically see what the backline looks like for your opponent. The items that my Temtem have, the buffs that my Temtem have on it, defensive, attack, defense, also what status are applied to the Temtem. On the opponent's side, you see their buffs and any items that I have seen proc. For example, Move Flank has Resistance Badge. That amplifies the power of any normal type move. So if I see him use a normal type move, Resistance Badge is going to proc, and now I have that information that is what that's the item that Move Flank is holding. This is all stored in the battle log. You can see what HP they were, what stamina they were when you last seen them. So it won't update their stamina while they're in the back for your opponent. This is a very useful tool. You will be looking at the battle log constantly. I know you open it with X on PC. I'm not sure about consoles, but of course there'll be a hotkey there that you can select. That's basically it, but the battle log is a very important tool. The last thing we're going to go over in this video is stat stage changes. Any stat that can be changed, being speed, attack, defense, or special defense, is going to be covered. This has been changed since early access started. Originally, it only went up to 5 and increased by 50% each time a stat was increased. However, now they've changed it to an 8 stat system, so you can be buffed up to 8 times, but the amount you can buff has been reduced by 25%. So each stat change in Temtem now will give you a 25% bonus to the stat that has been buffed. This means that you can get a maximum 300% efficiency on your buffs. As for decreasing your stats, it'll go down at start to 80%, 66, and so on, but you can see that formula here. Again, this is all on the wiki so that you can, take a look at this all here. But that's basically the stat changes. The biggest thing for anybody coming into Temtem that might be used to other games such as Pokemon, stat changes do not leave once you leave the battlefield. If I get something to +8 defense, +8 special defense, and I put it on my backline, when it comes back out on the field, it's going to have +8 defense, +8 special defense. So setting up with buffs is much stronger in Temtem than it would be in, say, Pokemon for the long term. This does allow certain playstyles like raid boss playstyles to work, where you just set up one Tem to just sweep the team, and you can actually just let it go back to your back line until its bad matchups are taken out, and then bring it out and then let it win the game. So thank you guys for watching this edition of my 1.0 guide series. And of course, guys, if you liked the video, please like it and comment on what you liked, what you might want to see change, what you may want to see me run a guide of in the future. But anyways, guys, that's it for this video. We'll be coming back with a team building guide shortly, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.